Hello, everybody, and either welcome or welcome back to my podcast. As always, I do like to remind everybody, if you do like this, please rate, comment, and subscribe. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, and YouTube. So this is an episode that I actually promised you guys probably about a couple months back now, when I did my book review on Jonathan Rauch's Kindly Inquisitors, which, if you have not read that book, please go get it and read it. It is amazing. And I will put a link to my original podcast doing kind of like an overview on the book. But in that episode, I had promised to do a little more of a deep dive on two of the chapters in the middle of the book, which are the fundamentalist threat and the humanitarian threats to free speech. And so I saw a story come through the other day, and it kind of reminded me that I wanted to do this episode. So let's go ahead and kind of get into it. Basically, in the book, the whole book is about threats to free speech. And it's almost painful to read this book now because it was written over 25 years ago at this point. And so many of the things that are discussed in that book are things that we are still discussing today. And it kind of hurts to think about how much progress we haven't made on this front. But I mean, here we are. It's still a great book. Like I said, I highly, highly, highly recommend it to everybody if you are somebody who is trying to engage in these kind of debates on free speech. And it just gives a better overview and understanding of what exactly the debates are and who you're dealing with. And that's why I really wanted to focus and do a deeper dive on these two chapters. Because what ends up happening, I think, when we look at these people who, for one reason or another, put up objections to complete free speech, I think we tend to lump them all into one category, and there's really not. There really is two distinct categories of people, and there's one category of people that you can reach and you can talk to, but there's another category of people that you can't. And that's the category I want to start with, because that was the point of the chapter on the fundamentalist threat. This was the chapter that was such an aha light bulb moment for me, because it really crystallized something that I couldn't quite understand before reading this chapter. And that is, for this group of people, for our fundamentalists, or I'm just going to call them fundies because that's a much more fun word to say. These are the people that hold views antithetical to free speech. And if you disagree with them, they think you're either stupid or evil. That was the light bulb moment, because I've never understood, like, when you see online or in public or anywhere, college campuses, stuff like that, you see these just violent, visceral reactions to people who just have what is like a basic disagreement with somebody, and then the other person just completely goes out of pocket and just flies off the handle, and it's just this response that is completely unwarranted to what was said in the first place. And I never could understand responding to someone that way. I was just like, I can disagree with people, or I can see something that I disagree with and either just rationally engage or move on. But understanding this, that for these people, anybody who disagrees with them is either an idiot or evil, that makes so much more sense now. Like, that really crystallizes it, because it takes it from being this rational thing of just being able to disagree with somebody, and it makes it into this emotional thing. Like, now you have to fight this person, because especially it really seems that a lot of the fundies nowadays come down on the side of, if you disagree with them, you're evil. So now for them, it's not just a matter of having a rational discussion or just a civil disagreement. It's you're fighting somebody who you think is evil and needs to be eradicated. So it makes it this very much this like moral cause that you have to go and fight. And I was just like, that's it. That's what this is. And I was just like, I wondered how I never saw it before I read that chapter. But now that I see it, it's like, that's what it is. And of course, these people, like, unfortunately, these are the people that you can't reach right now. There's nothing you can say to somebody who feels that anybody who disagrees with them is evil. There's no rational discussion to be had here. So when you're engaging with people, if you're engaging with somebody who's in this mindset, like, you gotta you gotta make a decision whether it's really worth trying to talk to somebody who is not trying to hear what you're trying to say. And not only that, thinks that what you are saying and therefore you are evil. Like, at some point, you got to know, like, when to put your hands up and walk away, and know when you can't help somebody. You can't reach them where they are at right now. And I think that's another good point that we need to remember when we're trying to have these discussions is you have to meet people where they're at. You can't necessarily expect them to meet you where you're at, because if you could, then they would already agree with you and we wouldn't be having a discussion. So you need to remember, like, when you're trying to reach out to people, you got to take a minute and think about, like, okay, where is this person at right now? What can I possibly say to maybe try to make my point in a better way, to try to convince this person? And the bigger picture here is, can I do that? Like, is this person even going to be receptive to what I have to say? And if you take a look at it and you realize that this person's not going to be receptive to anything you have to say, then at that point, there's no shame in walking away from a conversation or not even starting a conversation, because what's the point? I mean, you can be somebody, and you can be a presence and be there for somebody when they want to come to you, but you can't go to them. It's a waste of time. And another thing to kind of think about and realize when you're trying to have conversations with people is that politics is the new religion now. People say that we've gotten rid of religion in society. No, we didn't. We just transferred religious fervor to political fervor. So when you're trying to reach out to a fundie, you got to think about it in the same way if you were trying to reach out to somebody who's part of a religious cult and they're deep in the cult. Anything you say to that person, it's going to fall on deaf ears, because, again, they're not trying to hear you. And in fact, not only are they not trying to hear you when you, like, if you try to sit down and say, like, okay, you know, if you wanted to use let's use the religious cult thing. If you tried to sit down somebody who's in a religious cult and explain to them, like, you know, what's going on is kind of fucked up. Like, this is not healthy. This is not good. This is not a very good, rational way to live. Not only are they not trying to hear you, they're going to double down on what they believe, because they're going to view you not as somebody who's trying to help them, but as somebody who's attacking them. So again, when you're trying to engage these people, you have to stop and think whether it is really worth it, because all it's going to end up in is just this huge fight. You're probably not going to convince that person to change their positions in that moment. For these people, here's my advice. And like I said, just be somebody who, just kind of put it out there that, like, you're open to having discussions with people if they ever want to change their minds. Like, if they ever decide on their own, because it has to happen on their own. Like, just like getting out of a religious cult, like, once you decide to start to make that progression from being either fundamentally left-wing, fundamentally right-wing, whatever, and you start trying to come over to a different side, that is an internal process. And there is, I do imagine, a bit of cognitive dissonance that happens. And when somebody is going through that, just don't push them. Don't try to force the issue, but just, if they have questions, you can answer them, but just kind of be careful with them. Just be a little gentle, because it's an internal process. Like I said, it's not something that you can really force on somebody, but you can be there for somebody. Especially, I'm always interested in libertarian origin stories, especially people that come from the left, because it's so opposite of mine. And I've often wondered, like, I would love to sit down with somebody and just have, like, a deep conversation about it, because it seems to me to get from at least where the left is now to libertarianism, there had to be a little bit of cognitive dissonance there, and a little bit of trying to at least admit to yourself, even if you don't admit it out loud, that you probably did some things in your life that at this point you would have considered wrong to do. So yeah, it's just be gentle with these people and understand that there's no point in getting in a Twitter fight or a Facebook fight or fighting in comment sections of websites or whatever, because it's not, that's not helpful. That's not helping you. It's not helping them. It's just it's a waste of time. And it's one of the reasons why I really don't get into fights on social media. If somebody approaches me, I can pretty much tell by the way they approach me whether this is somebody who wants to have an honest discussion versus somebody that just wants to fight with me. And if somebody just wants to fight with me, like, I'm not taking that bait. Like, I'm not your girl. Like, I don't have time for that. So just something to be kind of aware of. And before we leave off of this note, I want to talk about the thing that kind of reminded me that I wanted to make this episode. And that's this case that has come out of USC. And I want to go ahead and kind of give the backstory of this and try to explain, because I think this is a really good example of the mindset and the mentality of the kind of person that I've been trying to describe when I'm describing a fundie. So let's go ahead and kind of get into that. The student's name is Gina Loring, and like I said, this is out in USC, so there's already your first clue. But she was working on a group project in one of her learning classes. I guess she's in an educational track. And the topic of the exercise was how best to help women of color receive prenatal care. And admittedly, a couple of the students wrote some pretty, like, dickish comments. Like, somebody wrote, we should sterilize them, and somebody else wrote, we should take their babies away. Like, obviously, those are pretty asshole, racist comments. But here's the thing. Gina then took it upon herself, which, by the way, the other students, they erased the comments, they apologized for it. But that wasn't quite enough for Gina. Gina decided to go to the professor, Dr. Kimberly Hirabayashi, and demand that she address the issue. So Dr. Hirabayashi, the next class, did, in the beginning of the class, kind of vaguely address it and move on. Didn't really want to make a huge deal out of it because she's trying to create a learning environment where people feel free to speak, which is what a professor should be doing. Even if somebody does say some particularly asshole things, like, you have a right to say that. It's not something that you should really be criticizing somebody for. And that was Dr. Hirabayashi's stance, was that, okay, this was messed up. It happened. Let's move on. Not good enough for Gina. Gina then requests a meeting with Dr. Hirabayashi, which Hirabayashi gives. Gina demands that she spend a whole class talking about the comments, and Hirabayashi refuses because, I mean, it's her classroom. She gets to dictate what is spoken about in the classroom, and it's not for Gina or any other student to be making these kinds of demands. So Gina drops the class, files a Title IX complaint, which I've already made my thoughts on the Title IX process known, and then actually launches a petition to change the curriculum of the first year students in the education program, that there has to be a class on critical theory, and that Dr. Hirabayashi needs to go take a class on critical theory. I'm just like, what the fuck? Like, who are you to try to make demands like that of, not at this point, not just your professor, but a whole fucking college to rewrite their curriculum because you're offended by it? Because somebody said some comments in a fucking group project that you didn't like, so all of a sudden you think that you get to dictate curriculum and you get to dictate to a professor what they should and should not be discussing in their classroom? And of course, this sounds insane to those of us who are rational people, but if you are somebody who believes that this is your moral imperative to do, that makes sense. If you believe that if somebody says something that you disagree with, that they are an evil person, this kind of behavior then makes sense to that person. So I wanted to use that as a case example to try to help make the point that there would be nothing that you or I or anybody else could say to Gina to make her understand why what she just did was really fucked up. Like, to her mind, she's perfectly 100% in the right. It's her duty to do this, which I kind of want to segue from that to talk about another piece that made me remember that I wanted to do this. This piece is from Quillette, and it's written by Bradley Campbell, who him and somebody else just authored a new book called The Rise of Victimhood Culture. And the argument that he makes in this essay, and I'm presuming in the book, I don't have it yet, I haven't read it yet, it's definitely on my to-do list, but that these students and these people who participate in this sort of victimhood culture and would be part of this Fundy group aren't just simply like, I'm trying to think of the best way to say it, like, he compares it to the comparisons in Coddling of the American Mind, which makes the argument that these students are this way because they're taught to be this way. And what Campbell is trying to say is that this goes a little deeper than that, in that these students that feel this way do view this as like a moral issue, like that speech is a moral issue and policing speech is a moral issue, which again goes back to the point that Rausch was trying to make about if you disagree with somebody or somebody disagrees with you, if you are a Fundy, you think that person is either stupid or evil. Which, again, it makes sense that if you want to make that argument, that this book kind of seems like it's going to go in that direction of making Rausch's argument about the fundamentalist threat. But it reminded me that I wanted to do this piece, and I'm really interested to read the book. Like, I'll link the essay in the show notes. But I think there is, and maybe even within the subsets of, even if you want to look at just like college students, maybe there are some who do this performatively because you feel like this is what you have to do to fit in, blah, 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 blah. But I do think there are true believers, people who do think that this is their great moral cause and that they have to go out there and white knight for other people who they think are oppressed or somehow lower on the intersectionality ladder than they are. So yeah, I wanted to bring that up. It's something that I'm probably going to come back to after I read that book. But yeah, let's go ahead and move on to the humanitarian threat, because this is the one where we could actually, if you wanted to engage people, this is where you can start making a difference. Now, Rausch refers to them as the humanitarian threat. I call this the butt crowd. The ones that always start the statement with, I support the First Amendment, but, or I support free speech, but, and of course, everything before the but can be safely ignored. But this is that crowd. These are the people that make these softer arguments, in a way. These are the people that are kind of like trying to tinker around the edges of free speech and try to make certain speech less acceptable than other speech. And there's these kind of, he makes a lot of good points in this chapter, and I'm going to go through some of them because these are the people I think you can reach, because these are the people who are trying to be somewhat rational, and I think maybe their hearts are in the right place, but they haven't maybe necessarily completely thought through their arguments. But that being said, and not to minimize the threat that these people face, what they present is a hell of a lot more insidious than the Fundies, because like the fundamentalists, you can look at people like that and be like, no, you're completely fucking off the rails. Like there's there's just nothing here for me. You're nuts. We're not going to agree, whatever. These people try to present arguments in a way that you could possibly agree with them if you didn't really sit down and think about the ramifications of the argument that you're agreeing with. And the first place I want to start is the hate speech thing. you always have people who make this argument of, I support free speech, but we need to do something about hate speech. Which, obviously, the first question is, what is hate speech? Who's going to get to define it? Hate is an emotion. So what I view as hateful, you're probably not going to view as hateful. A third-party person might view something as hateful that I would just be like, whatever, I don't care. So when these people start making this argument, it sounds very nice in your head, like, well, of course, we want to ban hate speech. But what the fuck is hate speech? And nobody can answer that question. Even the Supreme Court can't really manage to answer that question. So that's where I would start with that argument. And also, if somebody does want to try to define hate speech, where do you end? Like, I made this point a couple episodes back when I was talking about Gab being deplatformed, and I brought up the Cloudflare Daily Stormer story. And I thought that story was a very, very, very good example of how much of a slippery slope defining hate speech and trying to police hate speech is because even if you decide, okay, Daily Stormer is a bunch of neo-Nazis. Neo-Nazis are pretty fucking hateful people. Maybe we should silence them. I personally don't agree with that. But if you were of a mind that you need to get rid of hate speech, obviously Nazis would be the first place to start. But where do you stop? Like, once you've set that precedent that there is certain speech that is not allowed, where does it end? Like, who gets to be on what side of the line and who gets to be on the other side of the line? Who gets to decide where the line is? And that's a very important question to expect somebody who advocates for banning hate speech to have, because, I mean, what if you're on the wrong side of the line one day? What if I'm on the wrong side of the line one day? Like, what if today it's Nazis, tomorrow it's, I don't know, people who say that there's only two genders? Like, okay, where does it stop? And will it include you one day? Because obviously, once you start policing speech, I think anybody who knows anything about totalitarian regimes knows where that ends. So I do not ever want to go down that road. I am a free speech absolutist. All speech is free speech. Even if you say dumbass shit like all Jews should die, it's your right to say it, and it's my right to drag you for it. But I'm not going to silence somebody, because what if it's me one day? You know, like, there but for the grace of God go I. What if somebody decides one day that what I say is hate speech and that I should be banned and I should be deplatformed and I should have my voice taken away? Like, don't advocate for something to happen to somebody else that you would not be comfortable having happen to you. That's my point on that topic. Moving on to the next one that he brings up in the chapter. And that is the difference between criticism versus harassment. And again, where do you draw the line? I mean, there is one of the great things I think about the internet, and especially social media, is it allows all of us to talk to pretty much damn near anybody else. Like, I routinely talk to people, like, quote, talk to people online over social media that I've never met in real life, that I probably, without having start a relationship with them on social media, would never have an opportunity to meet them in real life. And that's pretty fucking cool, actually. Like, I think that's one of the great things about social media, is that we can talk to anybody at pretty much any time. Not that that person owes you a response or anything, but I mean, if you strike up a conversation, you strike up a friendship, I mean, that's cool. You get to meet people and talk to people that otherwise would be, like, completely out of your reach to ever talk to. But it also creates this environment where you can criticize someone. And I think that is perfectly fine. And I think if you are somebody who can take criticism from strangers, it makes you a better person, because none of us are above reproach. We all have our problems. We all have our little issues. And if somebody wants to point that out in a respectable way, like, there's nothing wrong with that. But there are people that view that as constructive criticism. They view it as harassment, which it's not. It's not meant in that spirit, but there are people that take it that way. And then there's also actual legitimate harassment. I mean, like, there's trolling, there's people that just post dumbass fucking comments. It's just, but those people you can just disregard. You can block them, mute them. Like, you don't have to engage with those people. So again, when you want to start censoring speech based on criticism versus harassment, like, who decides what's what? And again, you can always go to the most extreme example and point that out and be like, this is harassment, we should ban this person. But then again, once you start doing that, where do you stop? Where does it stop when somebody, like, just rolls up in your comments and calls you just, like, a bitch and a cunt and whatever, versus somebody who just rolls up in your comments and is like, hey, I disagree with what you said, here's why. There are people that view that as harassment. There are people that will block people for doing that. There are people that will mute people for doing that. And I don't get it, but I mean, to each their own. One of the other things I think is great about social media is you can wall your own garden however you see fit. You can just eliminate all dissenting voices if you wish to. I don't think that's a good idea, but you can if that's what you really want to do. So again, just starting down that road, just there's no end. Like, it's just no end, and you just end up sliding all the way to the bottom of the hill, and all of a sudden everybody's silenced. Nobody gets a voice because somebody somewhere is going to be offended by what you have to say, and they're going to make a big stink about it and get you, like, kicked off of a platform, or get you just whatever, get you fired, get you just. Yeah, I'm not a fan, obviously, of censoring any kind of speech, especially in this particular vein where you can self-censor if you want to. Like, you can handle it all by yourself. You don't need somebody else to come in and do it for you. The next topic he brings up in the chapter is speech that, quote-unquote, hurts somebody's feelings, which I will be forever indebted to Roush for making this point in this section, which is that suck it up, Buttercup. Listen, we're all going to get our feelings hurt by what somebody says at some point in our lives. That's no reason to police speech. Like, it is what it is. You're going to get your feelings hurt in life. It sucks. But that's not a reason to try to start legislating it away or trying to make it unacceptable to hurt somebody's feelings. Like, again, like, okay, you can say something completely benign and harmless to you, and it hurts somebody's feelings. And then all of a sudden, you're silenced. Like, you didn't even mean to hurt somebody's feelings. And people that do mean to hurt somebody's feelings, again, just handle it. Just either disregard it or do whatever steps you have to do to not hear it if you don't want to. Again, there's plenty of ways to handle this without expecting somebody to start policing speech. Now, this next one is one that I don't think it gets talked about enough, and I think a lot of people dance around the edges of this, and that's the thing that people want to put out there. And I've not heard anybody say it in these words, but like I said, people kind of dance around this topic, and that is speech that is uncomfortable. Speech that talks about things that you don't want to talk about. The idea that certain speech, the discomfort that it creates, is not worth the potential future knowledge that could come from said speech. And he uses the example of homosexuality, which I think is actually a really, really good one to use for this, because how we got here as far as homosexuality being something that is first of all not illegal anymore and is somewhat openly acceptable except amongst dumbass people, but anyway, and how we got to gay marriage being legal is discussing homosexuality. And when these conversations started, they were not comfortable conversations. Like, people didn't want to just sit around and talk about gay people and how they're not any different from straight people or anybody else. But again, you can't shut down these conversations, because the only way to get through these kinds of things and to get to a point where something that should be perfectly fine and normal and acknowledged and accepted is to have these conversations. It's just, like I said, I don't see people saying it in those words, but I see people doing it. I see it a lot, especially when you see people online talk about trans people or talk about any kind of odd sexualities, which, I mean, it's whatever. Like, cool, do you. But there needs to be discussion about things. If you want something to become normal, you have to talk about it. You have to present it. You have to show it in a positive light. Like, you can't avoid conversations and leave things to fester and expect them to just magically, like, fix themselves. Like, I don't get it. This is one that it does really get to me, because I see it in this way that overall, people that want to shut down certain people from talking want to do it because what they're saying makes them uncomfortable, which nobody has a right to comfort. You do not have the right to be absolutely 1000% comfortable at all times. And there are some uncomfortable discussions that need to be had. And avoiding them and shutting them down is not going to fix the problems that we currently have. We have to talk about certain things. We have to bring certain things out into the light. That's the point of free speech, is to talk about shit. So that's my biggest bugaboo with people trying to shut down free speech. It's like, if you don't like something, drag it out into the light. Show it. You think somebody's a racist? You think somebody's a bigot? Fuck it. Drag their ass out. Don't shove them into a corner. Don't shut down conversations that you don't like because they make you uncomfortable. Highlight them. Show why it makes you uncomfortable. Start having discussions. Stop shutting people down. And the last point that's made in the chapter of arguments that the butt crowd like to come up with, and this is one that I'm sure will sound familiar to everybody who's listening to this, unfortunately. And remember, this was written over 25 years ago. The idea that limiting certain kinds of speech makes the intellectual climate more free. What the fuck? And again, this is one that kind of burns, because this is a topic that is still coming up. Like, this is still like an argument that is made on college campuses right now, that by shutting down certain people's right to speak and certain people's right to express their opinions, you're making for a more free intellectual climate. Which, do you not see the fucking contradiction inherent in that? How is shutting people up making the intellectual environment more free? Like, are you stupid? But again, that is an argument that you do still see today. This is every justification that you typically see for people shutting down speech on campuses, is that, oh, we have to make it more free or more safe, and we can't have this kind of conversation or that kind of conversation because somebody might be offended. Okay, well, fuck it. You're going to be offended. Like, that's what college used to kind of be about. It used to be about going someplace and being exposed to new ideas and different kinds of people than where you were from, and learning something from these people, not shutting down people who don't already think like you. Like, I'm very confused about college campuses right now. Because when I was coming up in the 90s, and even, I mean, this idea was even, like, glorified in pop culture. Like, every show about kids going to college, and I'm thinking specifically about, like, A Different World, but there was a lot of other shows like that, where the whole idea was that, yes, when you graduate high school, you go to college, you go off, the point is you're going to meet people from other places, and you're going to hear things that you've never heard before, and you're going to be challenged mentally. you're going to be challenged intellectually by both your peers and your professors. Like, that was the fucking point. That was why you went to college. I mean, obviously you go to get a degree and do all that too, but the whole point was that college was always presented when I was coming up as not just you go and get a degree. It was presented as a thing you do as a young person to go become an adult, a well-rounded adult who is exposed to several ideas and develops one's own point of view and one's own perspective based on you've learned things from other people. Like, that was how college was always presented. So I'm very fucking confused about college right now. Like, I don't know how college is pitched to these kids outside of, it seems like it's pitched as like a 4-year vacation resort now. But yeah, I don't know how we went from, in the 90s, this being presented as this very positive thing that, like, yes, you're going to go somewhere and get intellectually challenged and you're going to come out a better person for it, to this idea that, okay, you're going to go here, you're going to go here for 4 years, you're going to get a degree that may or may not help you in your life or in your career, and it's going to be 100% comfortable and everything's going to be sunshine and farts, and you're never going to be challenged on anything. Like, I don't understand what the point is of college right now. Anyway, I want to go ahead and possibly wrap this up on this topic. Let's go ahead and wrap this up because I think I've said everything I've wanted to say. So let's go ahead and just finish this. And as always, if you did like this, thank you for making it this far. And if you do like it, please rate, comment, and subscribe. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, and YouTube. Take care, and until next time.